When the Grand Hall lights illuminated 27 exotic species, waiting in anticipation, only one seat remained conspicuously empty, the place where the most powerful war commanders should have been. But that spot was vacant, because Earth had never brought its military to peace summits. A simple question sent ripples of unease through the entire interplanetary assembly. Why doesn't Earth send their generals? And thus, Vraxian Ambassador Zorax became determined to uncover the dark secret behind this diplomatic anomaly. 14 rotation cycles before the opening of the 7th Peace Summit between the 27 species. Ambassador Zorax paced restlessly across his private chamber in the conquered capital. The holographic display hovering above his desk projected the confirmed attendance list for Earth's delegation, which he scrutinized for the 7th time that day. Diplomatic envoy, cultural specialist, interplanetary culinary consultant, Zorax muttered, his upper eye ridges furrowing deeper with each title he read. Not a single military designation. Again. Plick, his assistant, stood silently by the door, 6 tendrils clasped in the traditional posture of attentive waiting. Perhaps they simply prefer civilian oversight. Ambassador, he offered. Their governmental structure has always emphasized civilian leadership. Zorax dismissed the suggestion with a sharp gesture. Every species, all 26 others, bring military representatives to these summits. It's not just tradition. It's explicitly outlined in the Concord Protocols. Article 17, Subsection 4. All delegations must include high-ranking military personnel familiar with their species' defense capabilities and strategic priorities. Earth has violated this provision for 6 consecutive summits. And yet, Plick countered carefully, the summit committee has never formally censured them. Which is precisely why I find it so troubling, Zorax said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. For 18 standard Concord years since Earth's admission, no one has challenged this irregularity. He turned to face his assistant fully, all 4 of his eyes narrowing. Something isn't right, Plick. The humans are hiding something. Plick's skin rippled slightly, the Vraxian equivalent of a shrug. Or perhaps their system truly is different. Not every species views military power through the same lens. Zorax stared at the holographic display, watching Earth's delegation roster rotate slowly before him. No, there's more to this. 6 summits, 18 years, and not once have they brought military leadership. His voice hardened with conviction. I want answers before the 7th. The ambassador reached for his communication panel. Connect me with Agent Krell at Concord Intelligence. Within minutes, the translucent form of Agent Krell materialized in the center of the room. A gelatinous intelligence officer whose shifting, fluid body contained no less than 12 semi-autonomous neural clusters. Ambassador Zorax. Krell's voice resonated from multiple points within its body. How may Concord Intelligence assist you? I need information about Earth's military structure, Zorax said without preamble. Specifically, why they never include military representatives in their peace delegations. Krell's form pulsed with subtle blues and greens, a sign of cautious consideration. That's a rather sensitive inquiry. Ambassador, Earth's delegation compositions have been certified as compliant by the Summit Committee. I'm not questioning their compliance. I'm questioning why no one questions their compliance. Zorax pressed. 17 other species would face formal censure for such an omission. What makes Earth different? Krell's form rippled uncertainly. I can initiate a discreet inquiry, but I must caution that Earth maintains exceptionally sophisticated counterintelligence measures. Do what you must, but find me answers, Zorax instructed. Start with public records, then proceed to classified documentation as necessary. I want to know their military command structure, their high-ranking officers, and most importantly, why none of them ever attend peace summits. After Krell departed, Plick approached cautiously. Ambassador, If I may, what exactly do you suspect? Zorax stared at the slowly rotating Earth insignia that had replaced the delegation roster on his display. Advanced weapons, secret military technologies, strategic capabilities they don't want other species to know about. He paused, considering. Or perhaps something about their military leadership itself, something they don't want us to see. And if you find such a secret, Plick asked, then I'll bring it to light at the summit, Zorax declared. Peace cannot be built on secrets and exceptions. Whatever Earth is hiding, the Concord deserves to know. 3 rotation cycles later, Zorax received an urgent message from Krell, requesting an immediate, secure meeting. When the intelligence agent materialized in his chamber, Zorax immediately noticed the uncharacteristic turbulence in Krell's normally smooth form. "What have you found?" Zorax demanded. "Nothing, and everything," Krell replied, voice modules fluctuating erratically. I began with standard public intelligence gathering. Earth's military structure is conventional. Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, organized much like many other species. Leadership follows hierarchical command structures with civilian oversight. That tells me nothing I didn't already know, Zorax snapped. Because that's where matters became complicated, Krell continued. When I attempted to access deeper intelligence, specifically regarding their summit attendance policies, I encountered unprecedented resistance. Resistance? Explain. 3 of my data centers were compromised within hours of initiating the search, Krell said, its form quivering with what Zorax recognized as the gelatinous equivalent of fear. One of my research assistants was subjected to a molecular shuffle. His memory patterns concerning the investigation were completely reorganized. He now believes he spent the last 3 cycles cataloging methane-breathing species' dietary preferences. Zorax stared, momentarily speechless. Are you suggesting Earth detected your investigation and retaliated? I'm stating it explicitly, Krell replied. Whatever Earth is hiding about their military representation at peace summits, they are willing to deploy advanced counterintelligence measures to protect it. This only confirms my suspicions, Zorax said, beginning to pace again. No species reacts so aggressively unless they're concealing something significant. Ambassador, Krell's voice dropped to its lowest frequency. I strongly advise terminating this investigation. The countermeasures we encountered were sophisticated beyond anything in our intelligence database, and they were merely warnings. Warnings? If they'd wanted to do real damage, they could have. My research assistant is unharmed, merely redirected. The data center breaches were surgical, targeting only our inquiry files. Krell's form rippled with unmistakable apprehension. They know we're looking, Ambassador, and they're telling us to stop. Zorax considered this information silently for several moments. Delete all records of your investigation from Concord servers, he finally ordered. Erase every trace. You're heeding their warning? Krell asked, a note of relief evident in its resonance. No, Zorax replied, his determination hardening. I'm changing tactics. If I can't discover their secret through intelligence gathering, I'll force them to reveal it themselves. His eyes narrowed. At the summit's opening session, Krell's form pulsed with alarm. Ambassador, I strongly advise against confrontation. Whatever Earth is hiding is something the Conquered deserves to know? Zorax interrupted firmly. Peace cannot be built on secrets. Agent Krell, now execute my instructions and remove all trace of your investigation. After Krell departed, visibly distressed, Plick approached cautiously. Ambassador, perhaps Agent Krell's concerns merit consideration. If Earth possesses counterintelligence capabilities of this sophistication, then what else might they be hiding? Zorax challenged. No. Plick, I've made my decision. At the opening session, I will formally challenge Earth's delegation to either bring their military representatives or explain their absence. His determination was absolute. Whatever they're concealing, it's time the Concord learned the truth. For the remaining days before the summit, Zorax immersed himself in preparation, emerging from his hibernation pod only for essential communications. He meticulously compiled historical records of all 6 previous summits, confirming that Earth had indeed never once included military representatives in their delegations. He studied Earth's known military structure, leadership hierarchies, and diplomatic protocols, searching for any legitimate explanation for their consistent absence. He found none. The evening before the summit's opening session, Zorax attended the preliminary reception in the Golden Hall of the Grand Stellar Hotel. The vast chamber glittered with crystalline chandeliers, their light refracting through environmental adjustment fields designed to accommodate the diverse atmospheric needs of 27 different species. Zorax moved deliberately through the crowd, acknowledging fellow ambassadors with practiced courtesy, while keeping his attention fixed on Earth's delegation. They had arrived precisely on schedule. 12 humans, led by Ambassador Tia Jackson, a woman of composed elegance whose reputation for diplomatic finesse was well established across the Concord. What interested Zorax most, however, was not the diplomatic team but their security detail. 6 humans in nondescript dark attire maintained a carefully measured perimeter around their delegation. They wore no obvious military insignia, carried no visible weapons, yet moved with unmistakable precision and awareness. Every few minutes, one would touch a small device in their ear, murmuring something inaudible before resuming their vigilant observation. "Civilian security," Plick murmured beside him, following his gaze. "Standard diplomatic protection." "Nothing about them is standard," Zorax replied quietly. "Watch their positioning, their sight lines, the way they communicate. They're not mere bodyguards." Plick. "But they're not uniformed military," his assistant pointed out, "which only deepens the mystery." Zorax straightened his formal vestments. "I believe it's time I introduced myself to Ambassador Jackson." He approached the Earth delegation with deliberate casualness, timing his arrival to coincide with a moment when Ambassador Jackson stood slightly apart from her colleagues. As he drew near, he noted how one of the security personnel subtly adjusted position, eyes briefly meeting his before scanning onward, a movement so fluid it would be imperceptible to most observers. "Ambassador Jackson," Zorax greeted her with the traditional Vraxian gesture of respect, 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "I trust your journey to Concord was pleasant?" Jackson smiled warmly, returning the gesture with remarkable accuracy for a species with only 2 eyes. "Ambassador Zorax. Yes, quite comfortable, thank you. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation for thorough diplomatic preparation precedes you." There was something in her tone, a subtle emphasis, that made Zorax wonder if she knew of his recent inquiries. He pressed forward regardless. "Thoroughness is essential for productive negotiations. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice your delegation's composition appears unchanged from previous summits." "Is there something amiss with our delegation?" Jackson asked, her expression politely curious. "Not amiss, perhaps, but unusual," Zorax replied carefully. "Most delegations include military leadership, as per Concord tradition." Jackson's smile remained unchanged, but something flickered briefly in her eyes. "Earth traditions differ somewhat. We maintain strict civilian oversight of all military matters. Our delegation reflects our governmental structure." "Indeed," Zorax pressed gently. "Yet the summit protocols explicitly recommend military representation." "Recommend? Yes," Jackson acknowledged. "But, as you know, Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the Peace Charter permits delegations to be constituted according to each member's governmental structure." She tilted her head slightly. "Is there a specific concern you wish to address regarding our delegation, Ambassador?" Zorax felt slightly off balance. She had anticipated his line of questioning with remarkable precision. Merely professional curiosity. 6 summits without military representation seems noteworthy. 7 now, Jackson corrected pleasantly. But I assure you, our commitment to the Concord's principles remains absolute. Perhaps you'd be interested in meeting our interplanetary culinary consultant. He's developed some fascinating adaptations of Raxian cuisine for human consumption. The abrupt change of subject caught Zorax momentarily unprepared. Perhaps another time. The opening session tomorrow promises to be quite demanding. Indeed it does, Jackson agreed. I look forward to your contributions. Ambassador Zorax. I've always found Vraxian perspective on interspecies diplomacy illuminating. As Zorax withdrew, he couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation had not gone as he intended. Jackson had been perfectly cordial, entirely professional, and somehow had managed to reveal absolutely nothing of substance while making him feel as though he'd received a complete answer. She knew, he muttered to Plick as they moved away. She anticipated my questions. Is that so surprising? Plick asked. You're hardly the first to notice their delegation's composition. No, Zorax agreed. But I may be the first to formally challenge it. Tomorrow, Ambassador Jackson will need to provide more than diplomatic deflections. The grand chamber of the Concord Summit gleamed under the gentle illumination of ambient lighting, designed to accommodate the visual spectrums of all 27 member species. The delegates sat in the traditional circle of equality, each delegation section modified for their particular physiological needs. To Zorax's right, the methane-breathing Goral delegation rested in their sealed environmental pod, their translator units converting their chemical speech patterns into standard Concord frequencies. Beyond them, the radiation-consuming Zetulians absorbed carefully calibrated emissions from their specialized seating arrangements, their skin pulsing with colors that supplemented their verbal communications. The diversity continued around the circle, species that communicated through scent, through electromagnetic pulses, through subtle variations in body temperature. 27 distinct evolutionary paths, 27 unique approaches to consciousness, all gathered in pursuit of continued peace. The Earth delegation occupied a standard oxygen-nitrogen section, their physiological needs among the least demanding of any species present. Ambassador Jackson sat at the primary position, flanked by her advisors. Behind them, the same security personnel Zorax had observed at the reception maintained their vigilant presence, still without any military insignia. The summit's opening rituals proceeded with traditional formality. The Lumerian high speaker, Shimmerong, whose crystalline vocal structures produced sounds of extraordinary beauty, performed the harmony of assembly, a sound pattern that, through either coincidence or design, held significance in the cultural traditions of all 27 species. When the ceremonial opening concluded, Shimmerong's voice shifted to the more prosaic tones of administrative procedure. The 7th Concord Peace Summit is now in session. The floor is open for preliminary administrative matters before we proceed to the primary agenda. Zorax activated his signal light immediately. Shimmerong acknowledged him with a graceful gesture. The Concord recognizes Ambassador Zorax of Raxia. Zorax rose, feeling the attention of 26 species focus upon him. Honored representatives, I bring to the Assembly's attention a matter of procedural consistency that bears examination. His voice remained measured, diplomatic. Over the course of 6 previous summits, now entering our 7th, one delegation has consistently deviated from a fundamental summit protocol. He paused, letting his gaze move deliberately around the circle before settling on the Earth delegation. The Peace Charter's procedural guidelines state clearly that all delegations shall include high-ranking military personnel familiar with their species' defense capabilities and strategic priorities. This provision exists for sound reason. True peace requires transparent understanding of each species' security concerns and capabilities. Murmurs rippled through several delegations as Zorax continued. The Earth delegation has never included military representatives in any summit. While we have overlooked this irregularity in the past, I believe it is appropriate to address it formally. He straightened to his full height, all four eyes focused on Ambassador Jackson. I respectfully request that the Earth delegation either supplement their representation with appropriate military leadership, or provide the Assembly with a formal explanation for their continued exemption from this protocol. The chamber fell silent as Zorax resumed his seat. All attention shifted to the Earth delegation, where Ambassador Jackson sat unperturbed, as though she had been expecting precisely this challenge. After a perfectly calculated moment of contemplation, she rose. "The Concord thanks Ambassador Zorax for his attention to procedural detail," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Earth acknowledges the guideline referenced, but would direct the Assembly's attention to Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the Charter, which states, 'Delegations may be constituted according to each member's governmental structure and diplomatic traditions.'" She moved forward slightly, her posture open and confident. "Earth's governmental structure places civilian leadership in absolute authority over military functions. Our military serves at the direction and oversight of civilian government. Our delegation reflects this fundamental aspect of our political system." Zorax activated his signal for right of reply. "When acknowledged," he responded. Ambassador Jackson's explanation addresses the structural justification, but not the practical purpose of military representation. The guideline exists to ensure all species can directly address security concerns with those who understand them most intimately. Does Earth suggest their civilian leadership possesses equivalent military expertise? Jackson's response came without hesitation. "Our delegation includes security advisors with comprehensive understanding of Earth's defense priorities and capabilities. What we do not include is a separate military command structure operating independently from civilian oversight." She paused, then added with subtle emphasis, "I might note that this arrangement has presented no practical difficulties during 6 previous summits. One wonders why it suddenly warrants formal challenge." The implication was clear. What was Zorax's true motivation? Several delegates shifted uncomfortably as Jackson continued. "Perhaps the more pertinent question is not why Earth's delegation lacks military insignia, but why this absence concerns Ambassador Zorax so deeply. Does Vraxia perceive some threat from Earth that prompts this scrutiny?" Zorax felt the conversational ground shifting beneath him. Jackson had neatly reversed his challenge, placing him in the position of explaining his motives, rather than defending Earth's exception. "Vraxia perceives no specific threat," he responded carefully. "My concern is solely with procedural consistency and transparency in our proceedings." "Then we stand on common ground," Jackson replied smoothly. "Earth's commitment to transparency is absolute. Our delegation structure is transparent, consistent with our governmental principles, and compliant with Charter provisions." She glanced around the chamber. "Unless there are specific security concerns any delegation wishes to address directly with Earth, I suggest we consider this administrative matter resolved and proceed to the summit's substantive agenda." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Zorax realized with growing frustration that Jackson had effectively neutralized his challenge without actually addressing its substance. She had offered no real explanation for Earth's consistent deviation from standard practice, only a justification based on internal governmental structure that could apply equally to any species. "I withdraw my formal inquiry," Zorax stated, knowing that pursuing the matter further would only make him appear obstructionist. "But I reserve the right to revisit this procedural question at an appropriate time." "So noted," Shimmerong acknowledged, clearly relieved to move beyond the unexpected confrontation. "The preliminary administrative session is concluded. We will reconvene after a brief recess to begin the primary agenda discussions." As the delegates rose and began to disperse, Zorax caught Ambassador Jackson's gaze across the chamber. She offered a slight nod, professional, courteous, and entirely unrevealing. Yet, Zorax couldn't shake the feeling that behind her diplomatic poise lay not just the expected caution of an ambassador, but something more deliberate, more calculated. She had been ready for his challenge. More than ready. She had anticipated his exact approach and prepared a response that left him with no effective counter. Whatever Earth was hiding about their military absence from peace summits, Jackson was determined to keep it concealed. And Zorax was equally determined to uncover it. The summit's first day proceeded with the expected formalities: opening statements from each delegation, preliminary agenda setting, and the formation of specialized working groups for particular issues. Throughout it all, Zorax divided his attention between the official proceedings and careful observation of the Earth delegation, particularly their security personnel. What he observed only deepened his conviction that something was amiss. The 6 security officers operated with extraordinary coordination, maintaining coverage of the entire chamber while appearing to do little more than stand attentively behind their delegation. Their earpieces occasionally flickered with tiny lights, encrypted communications. Zorax suspected, though far more subtle than most species technology. Most notable was the woman whom Jackson had referred to once as Captain Nix. She never spoke during the formal proceedings. Yet Zorax repeatedly observed other delegation members glancing toward her before responding to particular questions or proposals. She appeared to be constantly scanning the room, her gaze methodically tracking patterns that Zorax couldn't quite discern. When the day's final session concluded, Zorax was preparing to return to his quarters when a junior member of the Earth delegation approached him. The young man, Lieutenant Riley, according to his identification, offered a polite greeting. "Ambassador Zorax, Ambassador Jackson requests the honor of your presence for a private discussion this evening," Riley stated. "Would 2000 hours in Conference Room 7 be convenient?" Zorax's inner eyelids flickered with surprise. "May I ask the nature of this discussion?" Riley smiled pleasantly. "Ambassador Jackson felt your procedural questions deserved a more complete response than was possible in the general session. She wishes to address your concerns directly." "Indeed?" Zorax couldn't quite keep the skepticism from his voice. "I would be pleased to attend." "Excellent," Riley replied. "The room will be secured with a privacy field, ensuring complete confidentiality for your conversation." After Riley departed, Plick approached with visible concern. "Ambassador, given Agent Krell's experience, is a private meeting wise? If Earth detected and responded to a simple intelligence inquiry with such assertiveness, then I should be extremely cautious." Zorax completed the thought. "Yes, I'm aware of the risk, but this may be my only opportunity to get beyond Jackson's diplomatic deflections." He straightened his ceremonial collar. "Sometimes, Plick, one must venture into uncertainty to discover truth." "And sometimes," Plick responded quietly, "one emerges from uncertainty with more than they bargained for." At precisely 2000 hours, Zorax arrived at Conference Room 7. The door recognized his biometric signature and slid open to reveal a small, elegantly appointed chamber. A subtle shimmer in the air confirmed the presence of an active privacy field, one of the most sophisticated security measures available, capable of blocking all forms of surveillance, both technological and biological. Ambassador Jackson stood as he entered, gesturing to a seat across from her. To Zorax's surprise, Captain Nix and Lieutenant Riley were also present, standing quietly near the wall behind Jackson. "Ambassador Zorax," Jackson greeted him. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." Zorax took the offered seat, noting that it had been perfectly adjusted for Vraxian physiology, a small but significant courtesy. "I appreciate your willingness to address my concerns more directly. Ambassador Jackson, you raise legitimate questions, Jackson acknowledged. "In the general session, I gave you only half the truth. Tonight, I'll provide the complete picture." She activated a holographic display in the center of the table. A three-dimensional model of the summit complex appeared, showing the positions of all 27 delegations, security checkpoints, and environmental accommodation systems. "Before I explain Earth's position," Jackson began, "I'd like you to consider something. Look at the special accommodations required for each delegation." She highlighted various sections of the model. Methane atmospheric controls for the Goral, radiation emitters for the Zetulians, gravity adjustments for the Pandari, temperature regulation for the Vraxians. The model rotated, emphasizing each specialized system. 27 species, ambassador, each with unique physiological and environmental requirements that the summit must accommodate. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "Now, tell me, which species requires the most complex behavioral accommodations from others?" The question caught Zorax unprepared. "I'm not certain I understand your point, Ambassador. Earth is an oxygen-nitrogen species with moderate temperature and gravity requirements," Jackson explained. "Physiologically, we're among the least demanding delegations present. So why would our military leadership require special consideration?" Before Zorax could respond, Jackson adjusted the holographic display. The summit complex vanished, replaced by a series of brain scans, neural activity patterns from various species. "These are comparative neurological responses to perceived threats," she explained. "Vraxian neural architecture here." She indicated a complex pattern of synaptic connections. "Zetulian here, Goral here." Each display showed distinct, but recognizably similar patterns. "And humans, Earth species here," Jackson continued, highlighting another scan. "Notice anything distinctive?" Zorax studied the patterns carefully. The human neural scan appeared unremarkable at first glance, until Jackson activated a secondary display showing the same scan with certain pathways highlighted. When humans encounter rapid environmental changes, particularly those suggesting potential threat, our threat assessment neural pathways activate in patterns remarkably similar to those found in apex predator species across the Concord. Jackson explained quietly. "Our military personnel are specifically trained to enhance these natural threat assessment capabilities." She looked at Zorax directly. "In simple terms, Ambassador, a high-ranking Earth military officer in a room of diplomatic representatives, registers neurologically to most species as a predator evaluating prey vulnerabilities." Zorax felt a chill move through his thermal regulation system as understanding began to dawn. "You're suggesting that the mere presence of Earth military personnel would trigger instinctive threat responses in other species?" "Not suggesting, demonstrating." Jackson nodded to Captain Nix, who stepped forward and adjusted the display to show comparative brain scans from previous diplomatic encounters. "These are actual neural readings from a series of controlled diplomatic exchanges. When Earth military officers were present, even in ceremonial capacities, threat assessment centers in representatives from 17 different species showed significant activation. Diplomatic productivity decreased by 43%. Territorial posturing increased by 67%. She let the implications settle before continuing. "Now consider a peace summit with 26 different species, each with their own instinctive responses, each detecting what their evolutionary history tells them is a predator evaluating weaknesses." Jackson's expression grew solemn. "The summit would collapse within hours, Ambassador, not because of any hostile intent from Earth, but because of unconscious biological reactions that no amount of diplomatic training could fully override." Zorax sat in stunned silence as pieces fell into place. Earth wasn't concealing advanced weapons or military technologies. They were concealing the simple, devastating fact that their military leaders, by their very neurological nature, registered as apex predators to most conquered species. So instead, he said slowly, you send only civilian representatives whose neural patterns don't trigger the same responses. Precisely, Jackson confirmed. Our security personnel, like Captain Nix, undergo specialized training to modulate these natural responses. They maintain their threat assessment capabilities, essential for security functions, while presenting a neurological signature that doesn't trigger defensive reactions. And this is why you responded so assertively to Agent Krell's investigation, Zorax concluded. Jackson's expression revealed nothing. I'm not at liberty to discuss specific intelligence operations, Ambassador, but I can say that Earth takes the stability of peace summits extremely seriously. Anything that might compromise that stability, including widespread knowledge of the very issue we're discussing, receives our immediate attention. Because if all delegates knew this, Zorax reasoned, they might begin perceiving threats even from your civilian representatives, simply through association. Perceptions shape reality, Ambassador, Jackson said quietly, especially when they tap into instinctive responses evolved over millions of years. Zorax looked at Captain Nix with new understanding. She stood perfectly still, her posture non-threatening. Yet now he recognized the extraordinary awareness in her gaze, the careful, constant assessment of the environment that he had mistaken for simple security vigilance. You've known this since the first summit, he stated. Earth has deliberately kept military personnel away to prevent triggering instinctive threat responses that would undermine peace negotiations. Yes, Jackson acknowledged. It was a difficult decision. Traditional diplomatic protocol would have called for military representation, but our neurological research was conclusive. Their presence would have been counterproductive to the summit's goals. Zorax considered this revelation carefully. What had seemed like a procedural anomaly, perhaps even a deliberate attempt to conceal military capabilities, was in fact a carefully calculated sacrifice made in service of diplomatic effectiveness. I understand now why you reacted as you did to my formal challenge, he said finally. Public discussion of this matter would have defeated its very purpose. Exactly, Jackson agreed. Which is why I'm trusting you with this information privately. Ambassador, not because I was forced to by your challenge, but because your concern for procedural integrity demonstrates your commitment to the Concord's principles. She leaned forward slightly. Earth doesn't bring military representatives to peace summits not because we have something to hide, but because their absence is itself a form of peacekeeping. The implications continued to unfold in Zorax's mind. Earth had discovered, perhaps through painful experience, that their military leaders' mere presence could destabilize diplomatic relations. Rather than insist on their right to traditional representation, they had quietly adapted, sending only those whose neurological signatures wouldn't trigger threat responses in other species. It was, Zorax realized, an extraordinary form of diplomatic accommodation, one that required Earth to limit its own representation rather than asking others to adapt to them. I will withdraw my procedural challenge permanently, he said, and ensure no record of this conversation exists in Concord databases. Thank you, Ambassador, Jackson replied. Earth appreciates your understanding. As Zorax rose to leave, a final question occurred to him. Captain Nix, he addressed the security officer directly. If your neural patterns are naturally similar to those that trigger threat responses, how do you manage to modulate them so effectively? I've observed your security team throughout the day and detected no signs of the predatory assessment patterns Ambassador Jackson described. Nix exchanged a brief glance with Jackson, who nodded slightly. A combination of specialized training and certain technological assists, she answered, her voice matter-of-fact. The training helps us channel our natural awareness patterns, while the technology, she touched her earpiece briefly, helps filter and process environmental data to reduce the intensity of our assessment behaviors. It's rather like having excellent night vision but wearing specially designed filters in bright daylight, Lieutenant Riley added with a slight smile. The capability remains, but it's adapted to the environment. I see, Zorax said, though he suspected there was considerably more complexity to their methods than they were revealing. An elegant solution to a complex biological challenge. Necessity drives innovation. Ambassador, Jackson said, rising to conclude their meeting. Earth has always believed that understanding our own nature is the first step toward transcending its limitations. As Zorax departed the conference room, his mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned, what he had perceived as a potential threat, a suspicious deviation from protocol that might hide dangerous capabilities, was in fact a profound accommodation made in service of peace. Earth didn't bring their military to peace summits because they understood something fundamental about their own nature, something they had chosen to adapt to rather than force others to accommodate. For the remaining days of the summit, Zorax found himself viewing the proceedings through an entirely new lens. He observed the careful positioning of Earth's security personnel, noting how they maintained comprehensive awareness of the chamber while presenting no behavioral patterns that might trigger threat responses in other species. He noticed the subtle communications between Captain Nix and Ambassador Jackson, a raised eyebrow here, a slight nod there, conveying security assessments without disrupting diplomatic discussions. Most significantly, he observed the extraordinary effectiveness of Earth's delegation. Without military representatives whose very neurological patterns might unconsciously influence negotiations, they engaged with other species on terms of genuine diplomatic equality, neither threatening nor threatened, but simply present as partners in dialogue. The summit concluded 8 days later with the signing of 23 new agreements on trade, security cooperation, cultural exchange, and environmental protection, the most productive outcome of any Concord summit to date. As the delegations prepared for departure, a general sense of accomplishment permeated the final ceremonies. Zorax stood on the observation deck overlooking the massive hangar where the 27 delegation ships were being prepared for departure. The vast space hummed with activity as each vessel underwent final preparations according to their species' particular requirements. He was so absorbed in thought that he didn't immediately notice Ambassador Jackson's approach until she spoke. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" she said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. 27 different evolutionary paths, 27 distinct approaches to technology and space travel, all gathered in peaceful cooperation. Indeed, Zorax agreed, though I now understand that such cooperation requires more deliberate accommodation than I previously appreciated. Jackson smiled slightly. The most important accommodations often go unnoticed. Ambassador, that's how you know they're working. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the intricate dance of preparation below. Finally, Zorax spoke the question that had lingered in his mind since their private meeting. "Captain Nix," he said carefully, "she's more than simply security, isn't she?" Jackson's expression revealed nothing. "All members of Earth's delegation serve multiple functions. Ambassador, efficiency is a virtue we value highly." "Of course," Zorax acknowledged, recognizing the diplomatic non-answer for what it was. "I merely observed that her awareness patterns suggest capabilities beyond standard security protocols. A natural talent, enhanced by training," Jackson replied. "Nothing more mysterious than that." Zorax nodded, understanding that he had reached the boundary of what Jackson was willing to discuss. "I've been reflecting on what you shared with me," he said, changing direction slightly. "It's remarkable that Earth chose to limit its own representation, rather than insist that other species adapt to your neurological patterns." "It wasn't really a choice," Jackson said. "Early in our interspecies relations, we learned, sometimes painfully, that certain aspects of human neurology trigger instinctive responses in other species. We could either acknowledge that reality and adapt to it, or ignore it and accept the consequences. She glanced at him. The purpose of diplomacy is understanding. Ambassador. Sometimes that means understanding ourselves first. A wisdom that more species might benefit from embracing, Zorax observed. Below them, the Earth delegation's vessel was undergoing final preparations. Its sleek design, distinctive among the diverse array of ships. Lieutenant Riley supervised the loading of diplomatic materials, while Captain Nix conducted what appeared to be a final security sweep of the perimeter. I will never again underestimate the significance of Earth's seemingly unremarkable presence, Zorax said quietly, nor the power of what remains unseen. Jackson smiled. Perhaps that's the most valuable insight of all. Ambassador, peace isn't merely the absence of conflict. It's the delicate balance achieved when all species can trust they aren't being threatened. She extended her hand in the human gesture of farewell. Until the next summit, Ambassador Zorax. As Zorax watched the Earth delegation board their vessel sometime later, he found himself contemplating the extraordinary paradox they represented. A species whose military leaders' mere presence could trigger instinctive threat responses had chosen not to wield that power, but to accommodate it, to deliberately limit their own representation in service of greater diplomatic harmony. In a cosmos filled with predators and prey, they had chosen to step back rather than dominate, not from weakness, but from wisdom, the recognition that true strength sometimes lies in restraint. Zorax returned to his quarters and recorded a private journal entry, encrypting it with his highest personal security protocols. Today, I learned that Earth doesn't bring their military to peace summits, not because they have something to hide, but because they understand something profound about the nature of peace itself. In their absence lies perhaps the greatest presence of all, the willingness to adapt oneself rather than demand adaptation from others. He paused, considering his final thought carefully before adding, I wonder how many other species would make the same choice, if faced with similar circumstances. To deliberately limit one's own power in service of a greater balance. That may be the most profound diplomatic insight I have encountered in 18 years of service to the conquered. Zorax closed his journal and prepared for departure. Tomorrow, the 7th Conquered Peace Summit would enter the historical records as the most successful to date. None of those records would mention the real reason Earth never brought their military, the biological reality that had shaped their diplomatic approach for nearly 2 decades. And that absence, Zorax now understood, was precisely the point. In a universe of diverse evolutionary paths, where instinct often preceded reason, sometimes the greatest contribution to peace was knowing when to step back, when to leave a chair empty, so that all others could remain filled. The next morning, as his ship broke orbit from conquered capital, Zorax watched the Earth vessel accelerate gracefully into transition space. He thought of Captain Nix and her carefully modulated predatory awareness, of Ambassador Jackson and her measured revelation of Earth's accommodation, of Lieutenant Riley and his disarming explanation of complex biological adaptations. They had revealed a secret, not because they were forced to, but because they recognized in Zorax someone who would understand its significance, who would see not a weakness to be exploited, but a wisdom to be respected. In the silence of his private chamber, Ambassador Zorax made a decision. When the 8th Conquered Peace Summit convened, he would propose a modification to the procedural guidelines, one that formally recognized the right of each species to determine their own delegation composition, based not just on governmental structure, but on biological and neurological compatibility. It would be his own contribution to the delicate balance of interspecies peace, an acknowledgement that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic statement was an empty chair. And as the stars streaked past his viewport, Zorax reflected that perhaps this was the greatest lesson Earth had taught the conquered, that true peace wasn't built on rigid protocols or formal representations, but on the willingness to understand and accommodate the complex realities that shaped each species' approach to the cosmos. In the vast tapestry of interstellar diplomacy, Earth's empty military chair had become, paradoxically, one of its most profound contributions.